Hi everyone. We're going to carry on with the topic of animating line logos in this lesson. This time we'll cover more complicated and advanced techniques, with the focus on the coolest Red Giant 3D Stroke plugin. We'll consider a bunch of awesome examples and see into how they've been created. We've also prepared a superb practice for you that includes the breakdown of this Flickr logo. So enough talking, let's get down to business. So, what is 3D Stroke? It is a Red Giant plugin that is an indispensable assistant for logo animation, and perhaps the most widely used tool for lettering animation. As you probably have already understood, using it you can create pseudo 3D lines with various thickness along its entire length. This is a paid plugin, but it is definitely worth the money. Besides, we'll demonstrate to you a couple of tricks in case you're unable to use 3D Stroke. 3D Stroke lives in the Effects and Presets panel, and it is best to apply it to solids with masks. It works somewhat similar to the usual stroke effect, but it is way more tricked out. You can change the color of the line in the script settings, along with its thickness and blurriness. The start, end, and offset parameters work just like their analogs in the Trim Paths tool. And you can loop your animation by ticking the loop checkbox here. The Taper tab allows you to adjust the thickness of the line's ends and to create these narrowed strokes here. We're going to often work with this tab, and we'll cover it during practice. In the Transform tab, we can bend our strokes and adjust them in the 3D space. This is an incredibly cool thing, and you'll see why in a little while. Repeater does just what you'd expect it to. It duplicates the stroke, and using it, you can create these cool animations in just a couple of clicks. Under Advanced, you can create a path from points. It's somewhat similar to spacing in the stroke effect. And that's virtually all that you need to know about it. The Camera tab allows you to adjust the camera, and motion blur speaks for itself. And I guess it's pretty clear what opacity and transfer mode are for as well. Okay, let's get down to practice and see how simple and incredible this plugin is for ourselves. Let's start with this animation. The frame of the film caption along with the additional lines next to it was created using 3D Stroke. Let's recreate one of these to wrap your head around the main plugin features. Let's draw a path to further reveal it on a solid and apply the 3D Stroke effect to it. I'll change the line's color right away so that it doesn't blend with the logo. There. Let's now create a line of the necessary form using the thickness and taper settings. Under the Taper tab, you'll see two checkboxes and 7 parameters. The first checkbox actually enables the narrowing of the line's ends. The second checkbox, when ticked, preserves the line's thickness when its length changes with the start and end parameters. If you uncheck it, the line's ends will be trimmed as if by a mask. Pay attention to this thick trimmed end. Let's set it back as it was. And let's now create the line design that we need using the taper settings. Here you can adjust the point where the line starts to narrow down, and the degree of that narrowing. Great, the design's ready. Let's get down to animation. We have two options here. Either we can create the appearance of the line by animating offset, or we can animate the start, end, and thickness parameters of the line. It may seem that the decision is obvious, as it's way easier to animate offset. But in practice, it's not all that evident. The thing is, offset cyclically runs the lines through the newly created path, which means that the thickness of the line constantly changes in the start and end points. And it doesn't always look that good. Undoubtedly, if your lines appear from behind the screen or from behind an object, the offset method looks perfect. But if your line appears from a point within the screen, then we advise you to animate the line's appearance using the start and end parameters, simultaneously changing the thickness parameter. This way your animation will be smooth and harmonious. There we are. The animation looks perfect. But if we look at it closely, we'll notice that the line's ends in the source logo are not rounded but sharp, and 3D Stroke can do nothing about it. But we have of course found a simple and fast workaround to do it. Duplicate the layer with 3D Stroke. Disable Taper. And simply make it a mask for the line from the logo source. Piece of cake, isn't it? And this is the final animation we got. The remaining lines have been created in exactly the same way, while the letters and the parts of the projector appear from behind the masks with offsets. The lower part of the logo is a usual stroke with trim paths. And again, pay attention to the common easing of the entire animation, and the additional lines that add volume and focus your attention on the caption in the center of the logo. We've covered how to work with 3D Stroke. Let's now discuss its cool features. One of its main peculiarities is the transform panel that allows us to rotate a layer with 3D Stroke as a real 3D object. Here's some examples we've created using exactly this feature. How does it work? Select a straight line with a 3D stroke applied to it and change its bend parameter in the Transform tab. And as you can see, it starts bending. Now we can get absolutely different types of bending lines simply by changing the Transform parameters. It's all up to you. Try things, play around with it, and find the best solutions. Oh, and you'll probably encounter this issue when the edges of the intersecting circles are visible. To fix this, go to the Advanced tab and set Adjust Step down to 1. Now, using Start, End, or Offset, you'll be able to reveal the stroke. By the way, you can change the type of a line not only by using Transform, but also by simply changing the width and the position of the mask. And when the line is ready, we simply replace it with a shape that is revealed by usual trim paths. This trick is well known to you already. And that's the whole secret of this animation. As you can see, nothing fancy here. What's important is to find the right angle and good easings and timing. This animation here has also been created by similarly using 3D strokes and the Transform tab. There are also a couple of interesting things here. How to easily and in a cool way create a spinning line. How to create a multicolored stroke. How to style your lines so that they look more impressive. Let's start with the beginning. You can create a spinning line like this in a bunch of ways, but the easiest one is to draw a spiral along which the line will be revealing itself, and turn it in space. Simply and dramatic. Speaking of spirals, there's a cool life hack not everyone knows of. As you know, there is no tool in After Effects for drawing spirals, but there is one in Illustrator. So let's open it and create a shape using the Spiral tool. Great. Let's now simply select it and press Ctrl C. Back in After Effects, paste this spiral into a path or a mask by simply pressing Ctrl V. As you can see, the shape fully corresponds to the one we've drawn in Illustrator. Let's now simply adjust its size as we need and apply 3D stroke to the layer. Let's enable taper now, so we better see the perspective. Okay, now go to the Transform tab and rotate the spiral along the x-axis. Well, and you already know how to reveal it. Question number 2. To create a multicolored 3D stroke, we've used the Color Ramp function. This feature has recently been added to the plugin. So simply update your 3D stroke to the latest version if you don't have it. It allows you to apply gradients to your lines. You'll have it gray and disabled by default because the set color parameter is set to solid color. When you set it to any other option, you'll be able to adjust the gradient. We'll set it to follows offset, and I'll explain to you why in a little while. Under the Color Ramp tab, you'll see the line on which all gradient settings are displayed. There are some pre-made presets, but we'll customize it our own way. We need to achieve sharp color transitions instead of the soft ones set by default. To do that, we've slid the controls of the different colors as close to each other as we could. And we've got the desired result. And let's now go back to the color ramp modes. When the line reveals itself, I want the colored parts to proportionally decrease in size as the line is revealing. And that is exactly what's happening now. But if I change the mode to Overpath, all segments will stay in place. At first, the purple part will reveal itself, then the blue one, and so on. Also, there are two buttons there. The arrows turn the gradient in the opposite direction. And Randomize chooses a random color palette for the gradient. And the last question, the one about stylization. Do you see the shadows on the lines? They've been created by using two effects from the Layer Styles tab, Inner Shadow and Drop Shadow. The first one creates a shadow inside a layer starting at its edges. And the second one is a usual shadow that is created under a layer. We have a pre-made animation of a spiral, so let's apply Inner Shadow to it and see how it works. It lives in the Layer tab, Layer Styles, Inner Shadow. There is a bunch of settings that allow us to adjust opacity, the shadow color, and the blend mode. Almost all other settings, such as size, angle, and distance, are for adjusting the position of the shadow on the layer. And by tweaking noise, you'll get the super popular grainy gradient. And many of you are probably familiar with the second effect. This is a usual shadow that is created under a layer. By combining these two effects, we've managed to achieve this interesting result. Speaking of stylization and effects, it's important to mention roughen edges, using which you can imitate frame-by-frame liquid animation. Take a closer look at this logo. Lines using which the letters are revealing themselves are 3D strokes to which the roughen edges effect has been applied. Let's examine how it works on this stroke, which has already been animated. Let's apply roughen edges to this layer. The effect seems to corrode the edges of the layer, and by doing so, it makes a seamless line look like it's been torn into pieces. The thinner the line is, the easier the effect seems to tear it apart. You can adjust blurriness by changing the border and scale parameters. The latter one adjusts the size of an object. There's also the edge sharpness parameter that stretches out the alpha channel and removes the effect's blurring. That's what we've got after tweaking the roughen edges settings. It's a cool effect, but I want the drops that the line leaves to stay in place and get smaller. And to achieve this, we'll have to choose a different approach. Let's disable the taper effect and remove the keyframes from the start parameter. Make the thickness parameter continuous throughout the entire animation, except for the beginning. Let's base the entire animation on changing of the line's thickness using the Thickness Curve tab, in which you can either draw a curve or use one from the presets, according to which the stroke thickness will be changing. Let's choose this preset. Turn it around and smooth the graph by clicking the Smooth button. This way we make sure that there are no sharp changes. Okay. By clicking this button, make these vertices editable. And now by animating the graph, we adjust the size of the drops and the way they disappear. By putting the vertex lower, we're narrowing a part of the stroke, and accordingly it gets more and more blurry until it disappears completely. As we've deleted the keyframes of the start, it is exactly by changing the graph that we shorten the line and adjust the disappearance. I won't be demonstrating to you the entire process of animating the vertices, as it is quite boring and monotonous, and you'll see the final result. But I'll attach the project so that those of you who are interested in every aspect will have an opportunity to dig further into it, and take a closer look at every detail. There. Now the drops are staying in place. Let's enhance it even more and add the animation of the mask so that it scales up as it is revealing itself. Looks more interesting already. Let's improve it even further and add rotation along the x-axis. Let it be 45 degrees. Look what we got. We have achieved a slight effect of spreading the drops, which makes the animation look even cooler. And to make this effect look like it's been animated frame by frame, we can add a new adjustment layer and apply the posterized time effect to it, to set the frame rate down to 12 frames per second. This stroke and roughen edges technique is commonly used in lettering animation for creating nice looking trails and distracting elements. Well, we finally made it to the most interesting part of the lesson, which is the animation of the Flickr logo. Let's start with the fundamentals, that is, with the idea. Flickr is a digital photo and video hosting that is associated with a large number of data and users. Furthermore, this all is hidden behind the simple and airy design with a minimalistic logo. We wanted to communicate this contrast as clearly as possible, and the idea of a digital whirlwind made with lines represents this in a pretty awesome way. We can see a vast stream of the lines that transforms into two small circles. We can break this animation down into 4 steps. The first step is the creation of the lines. The second one is the animation of the rotating circles. The third one is adding perspective. And the last one is stylization. Well, let's get this sorted out. Any whirlwind is shaped like a spiral, so we've created this path, in which the line rotates in a circle first, and then bends into a spiral. Let's take a closer look at how it was achieved. At first, we created a line with the colors of the logo. By adjusting the start and end parameters, we changed its thickness and length. Then we animated the appearance and disappearance of the line. In the middle, we specifically added a pause by copying the start and end keyframes. It allows the viewer to notice every detail of the whirlwind and to make the transformation itself more expressive. The easings will be in line with the general rhythm of the animation. That is, the sharp appearance. The pause in the middle gaining speed before morphing that will happen at the maximum speed, and then a smooth fade out. Let's take a look at the intermediate result. Okay, let's next add the rotation of the line in a circle that you can create using the rotation Z parameter in the Transform tab. And we've got this final animation. It suits our dynamics perfectly. Let's now add some details. Let's now apply taper and tweak it in such a way that we get the line that is slightly narrowed at the end. Let's create keyframes at the start shape parameter, which will sharpen the end of the line when it starts bending towards the center. Let's take a look at what we got. Let's also animate the thickness parameter when the line appears so that the line becomes thicker. It'll be much neater this way. Of course, one line doesn't quite look impressive. So let's create more lines in the same way by changing the color settings, the line thickness, and the size of the mask. The main task at this stage is to create a good and balanced composition that will focus the viewer's attention on itself. And you have to realize that these tasks are very time-consuming and demand a big amount of iterations. Experimenting is the easiest way to achieve a really good result. There are, of course, some rules. For example, long lines are most suitable at the edges of the whirlwind, while the short ones will suit best at the base. This way, they're imitating the shape of a tornado in perspective. At the same time, the number of thin and thick lines must be approximately the same. Then the overall composition will be balanced. So take these rules aboard and start creating. By the way, you're surely interested in how we've created this line with an outline. To do this, we've used layer styles and the stroke effect. It creates an outline along the contour of any object both on the inside and the outside of the layer. When the animation was ready, we've added variety to the animation of the lines themselves by making offsets when they're appearing and changing the rotation speed along the z-axis to make some layers rotate faster than the other ones. And that's the result we've achieved. There's also one small gimmick. Let's choose all the layers except the ones with the outline, and set their blend mode to linear burn to get this cool color overlay effect. The whirlwind's ready. Let's get down to the second step. Our next step is to create these spheres. The rotation of the spheres is essential to compensate for the sharp transition from the lines to the circles. This way, everything is going to look logical and reasonable. The gradually fading rotation of the circle will add continuity and realism to the animation. It seems to compensate for the energy that disappeared after the big object has transformed into the small one. The easiest way of creating the circles is to again use 3D stroke. Let's create a short path and adjust its thickness to fit the size of the final logo. And set the end parameter to 1 to create a circle. To make it rotate exactly around the center, move the mask slightly to the side, approximately like this. Let's get down to rotation now. Go to Transform and use Rotation Y to rotate it. It must be initially positioned in the center. So let's set Start to 270 degrees and End to negative 360 degrees. And the timing must be around 1 second. Okay, let's now duplicate the layer. Change its color and subtract 180 degrees from both the first and second keyframes. So the circles rotate in a mirrored manner. Let's play the animation. The movement suits us perfectly, but since the blue circle is higher than the red one in the layer hierarchy, it constantly overlaps the latter one. So we need to trim the layers in such a way that they overlap each other in turn. Great, now everything's perfect. And the last thing we have to do is to make the circles fade out after the rotation. To achieve that, we simply swap the 3D strokes with the two logo shapes when they overlap. We'll animate their position and rotation parameters and also apply elastic to them. Let's take a look at what we got. Let's also add a slight rotation along the z-axis. To do that, we'll use a usual null object, to which we'll parent the circles. Let's animate its position and rotation. Let's offset it using the position parameter and add a turn along the z-axis using rotation. It's alright now. The last thing to do is to combine the two animations that are the whirlwind and the spheres. It's important to find the right moment so that the transition looks seamless. And this is what we've got in the end. The next step is adding their perspective. Let's create a camera at an angle of around 60 degrees to keep the same size. Let's parent it to the null object right away to make it easier to adjust. Okay, let's now move on to the moment when the whirlwind morphs itself into the two spheres and create keyframes at scale and rotation along the X and Y axes. We'll go the not-so-traditional way and create the animation backwards, which is from the last keyframes to the first ones. We now have to find the position in which the whirlwind will hover before it transforms into the circles. It'll be exactly this moment when it starts bending, somewhere over here. Let's rotate the camera 25 degrees along the x-axis and by the same angle along the y-axis. Looks perfect. Go to frame 0 and set the values of the initial object's position. We'll do it as an original animation. That is, unfold it from its almost flat position, approximately like this. Let's now adjust the easings, which have to suit the rhythm of the remaining animation. I mean, it begins sharply and then slows down in the middle. Besides, let's also animate scale, so that the whirlwind appears small and then gradually increases in size as it's turning. Pay attention that as we increase the scale parameter, the composition scales down, and as we decrease the scale, it scales up. And no, it isn't a bug. This happens because we've parented the camera to the null object. So let's set it to 150% in the first keyframe. Adjust our favorite easing and check out the final result. Great, but there's still one small issue here. When the whirlwind turns, it seems to be a little flat. So let's change some layer's position along the z-axis to add even more volume. On top of the camera turn, it will look simply fantastic. There we are, almost ready now. Let's get down to stylization. You need to understand that in the matter of stylization, it is always worth starting from the design of the logo itself. If your logo is made with clean, straight lines or strict text, then stylization will often simply look misplaced. But at the same time, dirty textures applied to letterings drawn with brushes will look stylish and cool. Stylization will also be appropriate in these grunge logos, in which some textures are already present. In our case, the Flickr animation was a creative project that involves some freedom of communicating your own ideas. But as a rule, this has no place in commercial projects. There are some logo work guidelines that can't be left behind to maintain the corporate identity of a company. But returning to our logo, let's see how to create that kind of stylization. Let's start with the lines. We've applied the grainy gradient using layer styles and the inner shadow effect with noise. After this, we've pre-composed the entire composition and created this texture that will serve us like a mask for pre-compose. Let's look inside. Here we have 3 different textures with grunges and scratches. You can easily find similar ones on the internet by typing scratch or grunge texture in your browser's search field. The textures have been applied to each other with different opacity in linear light blend mode. And by animating the position and rotation parameters at the toggle hold keyframes, we've created this shaky looped texture. And at the very bottom, there's a white solid, which prevents Lume Mate that we're using for showing the texture from discoloring the logo. But besides the texture itself, we've used a number of effects here. Set Mate is the effect that allows applying track mate, but it has a lot more features. It's a useful feature, but there are times when it malfunctions. So when applying it, double check if it functions correctly. Texturize pushes the texture to the surface of the layer it was applied to. While it's not that highly visible on colored lines, it creates a very curious effect on white ones. Then we have the add grain effect, and it does what you'd expect. Using it, we've created this strained texture. And 2 turbulent displacement effects complete the setup. Actually, this effect creates different sorts of wavy displacements and distortions. But we've used it for creating this shaky contour that imitates the effect of hand-drawn animation. But why are there 2 of them? This way we achieve a more random and interesting shaking. That's the whole secret of this stylization. But let's take a look at the entire animation and see what we've finally created. As you can see, the biggest challenge in these animations is to arrange the elements properly. The nicer and richer the whirlwind will seem. the more vibrant the animation will look. The contrast of transforming a big and intricate shape into a tiny one is always a perfect way of grabbing the viewer's attention. And by adding an unconventional angle and stylization, you get a unique and extremely cool result. Now, I believe you also agree that 3D stroke is simply an ultimate tool. But there are situations when you can't use it for animation. For example, when you have to prepare a logo for exporting for web using Body Moving plugin that doesn't support effects at all, let alone third-party plugins. But cheer up, because we've prepared a workaround for you, even for such a situation. Firstly, you can imitate 3D stroke using Repeater, even though in quite a limited way. Let's create a path with 2 points that are positioned as closely together as possible. Change line cap to round cap. Apply Repeater. Increase the number of copies to 200. And set offset to half of this value and make it a negative number. Set position to 0 and increase the repeater scale to 105. And now we can bend this spiral in absolutely unpredictable ways by changing position, rotation, and anchor point. It looks quite like 3D stroke, doesn't it? To reveal this line, we simply need to apply trim paths after repeater and change its mode from simultaneously to individually. I won't be demonstrating to you how I animate trim paths, as we've already done this dozens of times, and you'll handle it easily. That's our final animation. In addition to trim path, I've animated scale and rotation to slightly enhance the stroke's rotation. And now direct your attention over here. It's clearly visible that the line is made with circles. Unfortunately, we can't fully get rid of this, but we can smoothen it using Gaussian blur, combining it with levels, just like we've done with liquidity animations. Let's set the blurriness and levels alpha channel. There we are. Let's play the animation now. As you can see, Repeater is a powerful tool, but it's still not that versatile. So let me present to you a versatile workaround, which is animation of the path parameter. Seriously though, simply outline the necessary 3D stroke with paths and animate it frame by frame. Is it a bit of a stretch? Yes, it is. But on the other hand, it works. Here the lesson on line animation ends. And as you can see, there are a lot of gimmicks and tricks in this seemingly simple topic. And you have mastered them fully. But you have to realize that this is just a technical part which allows you to implement your ideas. Good animation requires not so much mastery of techniques as a good feeling of dynamics and rhythm. And in their turn, they are achieved by long hours of practice and a number of analyzed examples. In this course, we've been looking at a large number of works that we didn't create ourselves and have been demonstrating to you a fast and easy way of recreating them. This breakdown allows you to realize and rethink the work that you are doing yourself. So practice and analyze. See you in the next lesson.